Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
What is up, Patreon family and full-time family if you're watching this at a later date? These are going to be the UFC 224 early fight pass prelim and also the Fox Sports 1 prelims that are going to happen before UFC 224, the free portion. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into it. You already saw the UFC 224 pay-per-view main card predictions over on YouTube. Make sure you check those out if you haven't seen those yet. But we're going to jump right into the early fight pass prelims with the first fight of the night between Albert Mina and Ramazan Emeev. Now, I will let you guys know that I'm easy to please. I'm not hard to please when it comes to UFC fight cards, but I will say this fight card, pay-per-view included, is probably one of the least stacked I've seen in a while. But it is what it is. It's UFC 224 in Brazil. There was talks of other title fights being added to this pay-per-view. Covington and RDA wasn't able to happen because of the Conor McGregor incident. Well, at least that's what RDA believes. Either way, though, this is going to be the early fight pass prelims and the Fox Sports prelims, predictions and preview. This is a card that's going to for sure be for the hardcore fans. I don't see a lot of casual fans tuning into this card, even the free portion. But hey, it is what it is, man. Let's get into it. I'm a hardcore fan, so I'm going to be watching all of these fights. When I say all of these fights, I at least mean the Fox Sports 1 prelims, because these early fight pass prelims are lacking. I want to see the Warley Alves fight. I mean, I'll watch all these fights if I just so happen to be watching the fights that early. But if I got to make an errand, like, you know, and the fights are just starting, I'm going to make that errand and try and be back by the time the Fox prelims start. So with that being said, let's get into the preview of the first fight of the night between undefeated Albert Mina and Ramazan Emeev. Albert Mina is 13-0 as a professional mixed martial artist, 3 wins in the UFC, 0 losses. Ramazan Emeev is 16-3, 16 wins, 3 losses, only 1 win in the UFC. He's only got 1 fight in the UFC, Ramazan Emeev. So, Ramazan's a little more experienced overall, but Albert Mina has more UFC experience. Now, Ramazan was fighting some really experienced guys outside of the UFC before a successful UFC debut against Smiling Sam Alvey, who's actually a high-level middleweight. He beat Sam Alvey via unanimous decision. Albert Mina will be looking to stay undefeated at home, but will have a size disadvantage against Emeev, who's listed as a middleweight, yet this bout is scheduled to take place at 170 pounds. So I'm picking Emeev to beat the undefeated Mina and take his 0 at home. I feel like he's been fighting higher level competition more recently, and Mina hasn't fought since his win over the 40-year-old Mike Pyle back in 2016. So a little over a year ago, he fought Mike Pyle, and before that, he fought a guy that was also, I believe, 40 years old, which doesn't mean a lot. I'm just, you know, he's fought some experienced guys, but I'm just saying, still, Smiling Sam Alvey, I believe, was higher competition for Ramazan Emeev than Albert Mina faced. So I'm picking Ramazan Emeev to get the W in the early fight pass prelim fight opener. Next, we're moving to Thales Leites versus Jack Hermansson. Thales Leites has 27 wins, 8 losses overall. He's got 12 wins and 6 losses in the UFC. Jack Hermansson, 16 wins, 4 losses in his pro career, so 20 fights total. 5 fights in the UFC, 3 wins in the UFC and 2 losses in the UFC. With that being said, I'm going to be picking Thales Leites to get this win. Hermansson has lost to both of the Brazilian fighters he's faced in the UFC, oddly enough, so he's 3-2. Both of those losses came to Brazilian fighters. Now, not only is he fighting another Brazilian fighter, but he's going to Brazil. So, for whatever that's worth, I know it's not worth a lot, but still. Also, Thales Leites is more experienced and he'll be fighting at home against the younger Hermansson. I'm going to be going with Thales Leites to get the W. He's a higher level opponent than Hermansson has beat to date, and he's also this more experienced fighter fighting at home. I got Thales Leites with the W over Jack Hermansson. Next, we're moving to Warley Alves versus Sultan Aliyev. Warley Alves has 12 wins and 2 losses in his pro career. 5 wins in the UFC and 2 losses. Sultan Aliyev, 14 wins and 2 losses in his pro career, 1-1 in the UFC. Willery Alves is fighting at home and should have the striking advantage in this fight against the Russian grappler Sultan Aliyev, who hasn't fought since a split decision win over Bojan Valicevic a little over a year ago. Willery has more UFC experience and has been in the octagon with some of the best welterweight grapplers in the division, in Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman, and he actually managed to submit Colby Covington before losing 2 fights in a row to Brian Barberena and Kamaru Usman. So I'm going to be picking Willery Alves, who has more UFC experience in this fight, and he's also fought higher level opponents and will also be fighting at home. So I think Willery Alves, this will be his fight to win. Next, we're going to opening the fight, the Fox Sports 1 prelims. It says FX, so these prelims might actually be on Fox, which wouldn't be too surprising, but normally they're on Fox Sports 1. First fight's going to be between Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos versus Sean Strickland. Zaleski dos Santos is 18-5 as a pro, 4-1 in the UFC. Sean Strickland is 18-2-1 as a pro, so he's got 18 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw, while he's 6-2 in the UFC. Zaleski dos Santos is a striker who will be fighting at home, riding a 4-fight winning streak. He lost his UFC debut to Nicholas Dalby, who was able to take him down 6 times in that fight. Sean Strickland's only 27 years old, already with 21 pro fights. He's already got 8 fights in the UFC, and he's been fighting twice a year, which is actually, I like to see that in a guy that's this young with already this many fights. He fought a lot before getting to the UFC, came to the UFC pretty young, and he's been fighting twice a year, which means he's had time to grow in between his fights. You know, he can fight and then reflect and grow from that fight again. So I actually kind of like that pace. I know a lot of guys fight at a higher pace, if you know what I'm saying, but at the same time, when you're trying to grow as a fighter, I'm not too bad at twice a year. So Sean Strickland's been keeping up a reasonable pace. He's a very young fighter. He's almost more experienced and the younger fighter. So even though he's going to be fighting against Zaleski dos Santos at home, I'm going to be picking Strickland, who's the younger, more UFC experienced, well-rounded fighter. I could see him scoring multiple takedowns en route to a decision victory in this fight. Strickland's only 2 losses in the UFC have came to Ponzinibbio and Usman, and they're 2 of the best welterweights in the world to date. So Strickland's fought some high-level guys, got a lot of UFC experience, pretty young. He's going to be coming to enemy territory, but I think he'll be able to handle it and pull out a W. Zaleski dos Santos was taken down. He's more of a striker, you know, so he's been taken down in some of his wins even. He was took down 6 times in his UFC debut, and then even in one of his wins, which he managed to get the W, he was taken down multiple times. So I think Sean Strickland will be a well-rounded fighter and be able to take him down if need be, or also might be able to outstrike Zaleski dos Santos. But it's going to be a good fight. Zaleski's going to have the home crowd advantage, but I'm leaning with Sean Strickland. Next, we're moving to Davy Ramos versus Nick Hein. Davy Ramos has 7 wins and 2 losses as a pro, 1-1 in the UFC. He's going to be fighting Nick Hein, 14 wins and 2 losses as a pro, 4-1 in the UFC. So Nick Hein is more experienced with more UFC experience, but he hasn't been very active lately, only fighting 1 time since 9/15. So since September of 2015, Nick Hein's only fought 1 time, but he's still technically on a 3-fight winning streak. Hein is a judo fighter that was outstruck in his last fight, but he scored 2 takedowns en route to a unanimous decision victory. Ramos fought both of his UFC fights in 2017, so he's been more active lately, but he did lose his UFC debut to Sergio Moraes, but he bounced back with a great performance, a 3rd-round submission over Chris Grusenmacher. So I'm going to be going with Ramos, who's been the more active fighter. He'll also be fighting at home. He's a jiu-jitsu fighter who should also have the advantage, or he definitely will have the advantage if the fight goes to the mat. But he also has the potential to outstrike the less effective Hein, who hasn't been fighting guys on the level of Ramos before he took his break from fighting. So I think Ramos gets the W at home as the least experienced but more active fighter coming in here. Got Ramos with the W here. Next, Alexei Olenek versus the Big Baby Junior Albini. Yo, this is a pretty fun fight, low-key. Alexei Olenek is 40 years old as a heavyweight, the number 10th ranked heavyweight in the world. He fought 3 times in 2017. That's pretty fucking active, not only for a heavyweight, but for a 40-year-old heavyweight to fight 3 times last year. Pretty experienced, and he got 2 W's, Alexei Olenek. Check this motherfucker's record out, bro. Alexei Olenek has 52 wins and 11 losses as a pro. That is fucking 64 professional fights, because he also has 1 draw. This dude's got 64 professional fights, and only 6 of those are in the UFC. He's 4-2 in the UFC, but he's got wins over some high-level guys. Albini, though, is going to be fighting out of home. Albini's a lot younger, ranked number 14 in the world. Junior Albini, 14-3, so he's probably got 1/4 of, he's got a quarter of Alexi's fights, professional fights, and he's also got a quarter of his UFC fights. He's only got 2 UFC fights. Alexi has 8 UFC fights. So Junior Albini literally has a quarter of the experience of Alexi Olenek. Albini also, which is a little concerning, is coming off of a loss to Andrei Arlovski, which snapped a 5-fight losing streak for the veteran Andrei Arlovski. So Albini's going to be fighting at home, but he has way less experience than the 40-year-old Alexi. Albini's coming off of that loss to Andrei Arlovski. He snapped Arlovski's 5-fight losing streak. This could be a similar fight to the Arlovski fight, as Arlovski was also a lot more experienced, and then Albini, he was able to pick Albini apart. The fight stayed standing. Arlovski landed more significant strikes, like 75-40 if I'm not mistaken. Alexi, he's been very active, as I said, to be 40 years old as a heavyweight. He picked up 2 wins, 2 submission wins over Victor Pesta and also Travis Brown before losing to the top-ranked Curtis Blades, who's on a tear, one of the youngest prospects in the heavyweight division. Looks like he could be the future of the heavyweight division. Curtis Blades, All-American wrestler coming up, still very young in his game, fighting some of the best guys. So a loss to Curtis Blades for Alexi Olenek is not too surprising. Curtis Blades is about to be fighting Alistair Overeem, just got a win over Mark Hunt. Junior Albini is definitely no Curtis Blades. So Alexi Olenek won 2 fights last year and then lost to one of the best fighters in the world, which is not Junior Albini. So with that being said, Big Baby Albini is a fun fighter. He's got knockout power. He came to the octagon last in his last fight against Arlovski in like a fucking Reebok diaper. That was pretty fun, but he ended up losing, which was a little concerning. Every dog has their day, and Olenek is a heavyweight who's 40 years old, and I don't expect him to be undefeated forever and beat everybody he faces. But at the same time, he's a well-rounded fighter who's got enough experience, and he should be able to use his fight IQ and experience to beat Junior Albini even at home, who's never beat a fighter as experienced as Alexi Olenek to date. So I'm going to be picking Olenek to, turn back the hands of time. He don't even necessarily have to turn him all the way back, because Arlovski did that. But Olenek, I'm picking him to get back on his winning ways against Junior Albini, who, has a lot less experience and lost to Andrei Arlovski in his last fight. But Albini could for sure come in here as a heavyweight and get a knockout in front of his home crowd. That wouldn't be too surprising either. This is a heavyweight fight. With that being said, let's move to the main event of the Fox prelims between Cesar Ferreira and Carl Roberson. Carl Roberson's coming from Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. He's undefeated, 6-0 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC. One of those Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, one of those an actual fight in the UFC. Cesar Ferreira is a lot more UFC experience and even more experience as a pro. Cesar Ferreira has 13 professional wins, 6 professional losses, 8 wins in the UFC, 4 losses in the UFC, a lot more experience than Carl Roberson. Roberson looked good in Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series and also his UFC debut against Darren Stewart, but he's never fought a guy as experienced as Cesar Ferreira, who's also going to be fighting in front of his home crowd and is 4-1 in his last 5 fights. But Ferreira will be fighting arguably the most explosive striker he's faced in that time and will be looking to spoil Ferreira's homecoming. Ferreira has scored an average of 3 takedowns in his last 5 fights, so as long as Cesar doesn't get KO'd, I think he should be able to put together a well-rounded game plan and use his experience to avoid the KO in this fight from Roberson. And if he does that, he should be able to win a decision, maybe even score a takedown and win a submission in this fight over Carl Roberson. But Roberson is undefeated. He's dominated both of his opponents to date in the UFC, although they were not on Ferreira's level. He won both of those fights via first-round stoppage. So Ferreira's going to have to be careful to avoid being finished in this fight, but I think if he can, he'll be able to pull out a win in front of his home crowd. So I'm picking Cesar Ferreira to get the W. With that being said, thanks for checking these out. These are the main card and the Fight Pass and Fox Sports prelim predictions. The main card predictions, of course, are over there on YouTube. I'm sure you probably already checked those out. So thanks for checking this out. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out. And as always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell right next to it so you're notified every time I upload a video. I'm out.
This is #1 bullshit.